In addition to military efforts abroad, in the aftermath of 9/11, the Bush administration increased domestic efforts to prevent future attacks. Various government bureaucracies that handled security and military functions were reorganized. A new cabinet-level agency called the United States Department of Homeland Security was created in November 2002 to lead and coordinate the largest reorganization of the U.S. federal government since the consolidation of the armed forces into the Department of Defense. Citation needed. The Justice Department launched the National Security Entry-Exit Registration System for certain male non-citizens in the U.S., requiring them to register in person at offices of the Immigration and Naturalization Service. The USA Patriot Act of October 2001 dramatically reduces restrictions on law enforcement agencies' ability to search telephone, email communications, medical, financial, and other records, eases restrictions on foreign intelligence gathering within the United States, expands the Secretary of the Treasury's authority to regulate financial transactions, particularly those involving foreign individuals and entities, and broadens the discretion of law enforcement and immigration authorities in detaining and deporting immigrants suspected of terrorism-related acts. The act also expanded the definition of terrorism to include domestic terrorism, thus enlarging the number of activities to which the USA Patriot Act's expanded law enforcement powers could be applied. A new terrorist finance tracking program monitored the movements of terrorists' financial resources, discontinued after being revealed by the New York Times. Global telecommunication usage, including those with no links to, is being collected and monitored through the NSA electronic surveillance program. The Patriot Act is still in effect. Political interest groups have stated that these laws remove important restrictions on governmental authority and are a dangerous encroachment on civil liberties, possible unconstitutional violations of the Fourth Amendment. On 30 July 2003, the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, filed the first legal challenge against Section 215 of the Patriot Act, claiming that it allows the FBI to violate a citizen's First Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment rights, and right to due process by granting the government the right to search a person's business, bookstore, and library records in a terrorist investigation, without disclosing to the individual that records were being searched. 227. Also, governing bodies in many communities have passed symbolic resolutions against the act. John Walker Lind was captured as an enemy combatant during the United States' 2001 invasion of Afghanistan. In a speech on 9 June 2005, Bush said that the USA Patriot Act had been used to bring charges against more than 400 suspects, more than half of whom had been convicted. Meanwhile, the ACLU quoted Justice Department figures showing that 7,000 people have complained of abuse of the act. Citation needed. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, began an initiative in early 2002 with the creation of the Total Information Awareness Program, designed to promote information technologies that could be used in counterterrorism. This program, facing criticism, has since been defunded by Congress. Citation needed. By 2003, 12 major conventions and protocols were designed to combat terrorism. These were adopted and ratified by many states. These conventions require states to cooperate on principal issues regarding unlawful seizure of aircraft, the physical protection of nuclear materials, and the freezing of assets of militant networks. 228. In 2005, the UN Security Council adopted Resolution 1624 concerning incitement to commit acts of terrorism and the obligations of countries to comply with international human rights laws. 229. Although both resolutions require mandatory annual reports on counterterrorism activities by adopting nations, the United States and Israel have both declined to submit reports. In the same year, The United States Department of Defense and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff issued a planning document by the name National Military Strategic Plan for the War on Terrorism, which stated that it constituted the comprehensive military plan to prosecute the global war on terror for the armed forces of the United States, including the findings and recommendations of the 9/11 Commission and a rigorous examination with the Department of Defense. On 9 January 2007, the House of Representatives passed a bill, by a vote of 299-128, enacting many of the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission. The bill passed in the U.S. Senate, 230, by a vote of 60-38, on 13 March 2007, and it was signed into law on 3 August 2007 by President Bush. It became Public Law 11053. In July 2012, U.S. Senate passed a resolution urging that the Haqqani Network be designated a foreign terrorist organization, 231. The Office of Strategic Influence was secretly created after 9/11 for the purpose of coordinating propaganda efforts, but was closed soon after being discovered. The Bush administration implemented the Continuity of Operations Plan, or Continuity of Government, to ensure that U.S. government would be able to continue in catastrophic circumstances. Since 9/11, extremists made various attempts to attack the United States with varying levels of organization and skill. For example, vigilant passengers aboard a transatlantic flight prevented Richard Reed in 2001 and Umar Farouk Abdulmutalab in 2009 from detonating an explosive device. Other terrorist plots have been stopped by federal agencies using new legal powers and investigative tools, sometimes in cooperation with foreign governments. Citation needed. Such thwarted attacks include the 2001 shoe bomb plot, a plan to crash airplanes into the U.S. Bank Tower, Aka Library Tower, in Los Angeles, the 2003 plot by and Faris to blow up the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City, the 2004 financial buildings plot, which targeted the International Monetary Fund and World Bank buildings in Washington, D.C., the New York Stock Exchange, and other financial institutions, the 2004 Columbus Shopping Mall bombing plot, the 2006 Sears Tower plot, the 2007 Fort Dix attack plot, the 2007 John F. Kennedy International Airport attack plot, the New York subway bombing plot, and 2010 Times Square car bombing attempt. The Obama administration promised the closing of the Guantanamo Bay detention camp, Gitmo, increased the number of troops in Afghanistan, and promised the withdrawal of its forces from Iraq. Due to congressional opposition, the Obama administration was unable to close Gitmo, but brought down its prison population from 242 detainees to 40 detainees. 232. President Trump, during his first administration, signed an executive order keeping Guantanamo Bay's detention camp opened indefinitely, bringing an end to efforts to close it. 233. During his first term, only one detainee was transferred. The Biden administration, like the former Obama administration, pledged to close Gitmo, but proved unsuccessful too, and added million-dollar expansions. 234. A total of 25 detainees were transferred during the Biden presidency. After being inaugurated for his second term, President Trump signed a presidential memorandum to begin expansion of the Guantanamo Migrant Operations Center to allow for detainment of up to 30,000 migrants. 235. Transnational actions. Extraordinary rendition. Alleged extraordinary rendition, illegal flights of the CIA, as reported by Ars Expospolita 236. CIA's extraordinary rendition and detention program. Countries involved in the program. According to the 2013 Open Society Foundation's report on torture 237-238. After 11 September attacks, the United States government commenced a program of illegal, extraordinary rendition, sometimes referred to as irregular rendition or forced rendition, the government-sponsored abduction and extrajudicial transfer of a person from one country to transferee countries. With the consent of transferee countries, 239-240-38, the aim of extraordinary rendition is often conducting torture on the detainee that would be difficult to conduct in the U.S. legal environment, a practice known as torture by proxy. Starting in 2002, U.S. government rendered hundreds of illegal combatants for U.S. detention and transported detainees to U.S.-controlled sites as part of an extensive interrogation program that included torture. 240. One extraordinary rendition continued under the Obama administration, with targets being interrogated and subsequently taken to the U.S. for trial. 242. The United Nations considers one nation abducting the citizens of another a crime against humanity. 243. In July 2014, the European Court of Human Rights condemned the government of Poland for participating in CIA extraordinary rendition, ordering Poland to pay restitution to men who had been abducted, taken to a CIA black site in Poland, and tortured. 240-246. Rendition to black sites. See also, CIA black sites and ghost detainee. In 2005, The Washington Post and Human Rights Watch, HRW, published revelations concerning kidnapping of detainees by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency and their transport to black sites, covert prisons operated by the CIA, whose existence is denied by the U.S. government. The European Parliament published a report connecting use of such secret detention black sites for detainees kidnapped as part of extraordinary rendition. See the European Parliament's investigation and report. Although some black sites have been known to exist inside European Union states, these detention centers violate the European Convention on Human Rights (ECHR) and the UN Convention Against Torture, treaties that all EU member states are bound to follow. 247-248-249. The U.S. had ratified the United Nations Convention Against Torture in 1994. 250. According to ABC News, two such facilities, in countries mentioned by Human Rights Watch, have been closed following the recent publicity with the CIA relocating the detainees. Almost all of these detainees were tortured as part of the enhanced interrogation techniques of the CIA. 251. Despite the closure of these sites, their legacies in certain countries continue to live on and haunt domestic politics. 252. Criticism of U.S. media's withholding of coverage. Major American newspapers, such as The Washington Post, have been criticized for deliberately withholding publication of articles reporting locations of black sites. The Post defended its decision to suppress this news on the ground that such revelations could open the U.S. government to legal challenges, particularly in foreign courts, and increase the risk of political condemnation at home and abroad. However, according to Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, the possibility that illegal, unpopular government actions might be disrupted is not a consequence to be feared. However, it's the whole point of the U.S. First Amendment. Without the basic fact of where these prisons are, it's difficult if not impossible for legal challenges or political condemnation to force them to close. Fair argued that the damage done to the global reputation of the United States by the continued existence of black site prisons was more dangerous than any threat caused by the exposure of their locations. 253. The complex at Sterkiekuti, a Soviet-era compound once used by German intelligence in World War II, is best known as having been the only Russian intelligence training school to operate outside the Soviet Union. Its prominence in the Soviet era suggests that it may have been the facility first identified, but never named, when the Washington Post's Dana Priest revealed the existence of the CIA's secret prison network in November 2005. 254. The journalists who exposed this provided their sources, and this information and documents were provided to the Washington Post in 2005. In addition, they also identified such black sites are concealed. Former European and U.S. intelligence officials indicate that the secret prisons across the European Union, first identified by the Washington Post, are likely not permanent locations, making them difficult to identify and locate. What some believe was a network of secret prisons was most probably a series of facilities used temporarily by the United States when needed, officials say. Interim black sites, secret facilities used for covert activities, can be as small as a room in a government building, which only becomes a black site when a prisoner is brought in for short-term detainment and interrogation. The journalists went on to explain that such a site, sources say, would have to be near an airport. The airport in question is the Shitno-Shimony International Airport. In response to these allegations, former Polish intelligence chief Zbigniew Siemiatkowski embarked on a media blitz and claimed that the allegations were part of the domestic political battle in the U.S. over who is to succeed current Republican President George W. Bush, according to the German news agency Deutsche Presse-Agenter. 255. Prison ships. The United States has also been accused of operating floating prisons to house and transport those arrested in its war on terror, according to human rights lawyers. They have claimed that the U.S. has tried to conceal the numbers and whereabouts of detainees. Although no credible information to support these assertions has ever come to light, the alleged justification for prison ships is primarily to remove the ability for jihadists to target a fixed location to facilitate the escape of high-value targets, commanders, operations chiefs, etc. 256. Guantanamo Bay Detention Camp. Detainees upon arrival at Camp X-Ray, January 2002. The U.S. government set up the Guantanamo Bay Detention Camp in 2002, a United States military prison located in Guantanamo Bay Naval Base. 257. President Bush declared that the Geneva Convention, which protects prisoners of war, would not apply to Taliban and al-Qaeda detainees captured in Afghanistan. 258. Since inmates were detained indefinitely without trial, and several detainees have allegedly been tortured. This camp is considered to be a major breach of human rights by Amnesty International. 259. The detention camp was set up by the U.S. government on Guantanamo Bay, since the military base is not legally domestic U.S. territory, and thus was a legal black hole. 260-261. Most prisoners of Guantanamo were eventually freed without ever being charged with any crime, and were transferred to other countries. 262. By July 2021, 40 men remain in the prison and almost three-quarters of them have never been criminally charged. They're known as forever prisoners and are being detained indefinitely. 263. As of 2025, 15 detainees remain, with 3 awaiting transfer, 9 who have been charged or convicted of war crimes, and 3 who are held in indefinite law of war detention without facing tribunal charges nor being recommended for release. Major terrorist attacks and plots since 9/11. Following the launch of War on Terror by the United States, several Islamist militant groups as well as militant individuals have launched attacks against the assets of U.S.-led coalition, including in Western countries where active warfare is not taking place. Attacks by al-Qaeda. Main articles: Al-Qaeda and timeline of al-Qaeda attacks. The 2002 Bali bombings in Indonesia were committed by various members of Jemaah Islamiyah, an organization linked to al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb claimed responsibility for the 11 April 2007 Algiers bombings, which targeted the office of Algerian Prime Minister and a police station. Morocco blamed al-Qaeda for the 2011 Marrakesh bombing, which targeted French nationals. However, al-Qaeda denies involvement in the attack. To date, no one has claimed responsibility for the 2012 U.S. consulate attack in Benghazi in Libya, and al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Pro-al-Qaeda militias and individuals sympathetic to al-Qaeda are considered to be the orchestrators of the attack. The attacks were launched 18 hours after al-Qaeda Emir Ayman al-Zawahiri released a video urging Muslims to attack American targets in Libya to avenge the killing of al-Qaeda leader Abu Yahya al-Libi. The release of the video, as well as the launching of the attacks, coincided with the 11th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. The gunmen in the Charlie Hebdo shooting in Paris identified themselves as belonging to al-Qaeda's Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula claimed responsibility for the Naval Air Station Pensacola shooting in the United States. Islamic State. Main articles: Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant and list of terrorist incidents linked to ISIL. See also, list of wars and battles involving ISIL. 2013, Reyhanli bombings in Turkey that led to 52 deaths and the injury of 140 people. 2014 Canadian Parliament shootings, an ISIL-inspired attack on Canada's Parliament, resulting in the death of a Canadian soldier and that of the perpetrator. 2015 Port de Vincennes siege perpetrated by Amdi Koulibaly in Paris, which led to 4 deaths and the injury of 9 others. 2015 Corinthia Hotel attack on 27 January in Libya that resulted in 10 deaths. 2015 Sana'a Mosque bombings on 20 March that led to the death of 142 and injury of 351 people, 264. 2015 Curtis Culwell Center attack on 3 May 2015 that resulted in the injury of 1 security officer. November 2015, Paris attacks on the 13th that left at least 137 dead and injured at least 352 civilians, caused France to be put under a state of emergency, close its borders and deploy 3 French contingency plans. 265 Islamic State claimed responsibility for the attacks. 266, with French President François Hollande later stated the attacks were carried out by the Islamic State with internal help. 267. 2015 San Bernardino attack on 2 December 2015. 2 gunmen attacked a county building in San Bernardino, California, killing 16 people and injuring 24 others. 268. 2016 Brussels bombings on 22 March 2016 2 bombing attacks, first at Brussels Airport and the second at the Malbeek/Maelbeek metro station, killed 35 people and injured more than 300. 269. 2016 Orlando nightclub shooting on 12 June 2016, a gunman opened fire at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, killing 50 people and wounding 53 others. It was the second worst mass shooting in U.S. history. 270. 2024 Crocus City Hall attack, ISIS. K gunmen launched an attack on a concert hall in Krasnogorsk, Russia, killing 145 people and wounding 551 others. It was the deadliest terrorist attack on Russian soil since the Beslan school siege in 2004. Attacks by other Islamist militant groups and individuals. The 2003 Casablanca bombings were carried out by Salafia Jihadiya militant group. After the 2003 Istanbul bombings, which attacked British and Jewish targets, Turkey charged 74 people with involvement, including Syrian al-Qaeda member Lowy al-Saka. Islamist group Great Eastern Islamic Raiders Front claimed responsibility for the attacks. The 2004 Madrid train bombings in Spain were carried out by Moroccan-born Jamal Zalghem and 5 other individuals in opposition to Spanish participation in the 2003 U.S.-led invasion of Iraq. The 7 July 2005 London bombings in the United Kingdom, which targeting London's public transport system, were perpetrated by 4 Islamist militants. The 2009 Fort Hood shooting in the United States was committed by Nidal Hassan, who had been in communication with Anwar al-Awlaki. The U.S. Department of Defense classified the shooting as an incident of workplace violence. The 2007 Glasgow International Airport attack in the United Kingdom was carried out by Bilal Abdullah and Kafil Ahmed. The 2012 Toulouse and Montauban shootings, which targeted French soldiers and a Jewish school, were committed by Mohamed Merah. Although Merah claimed ties to al-Qaeda, French authorities have denied any connection. The 2023 7th October attack, which targeted Israeli soldiers and civilians, were committed by Hamas and its allies. With a barrage of at least 3,000 rockets launched against Israel and vehicle transported and powered paraglider and infantry incursions into Israel, it was the deadliest terrorist attack in Israel's history and the 3rd deadliest terrorist attack in the 21st century. 27. There is no widely agreed on figure for the number of people that have been killed so far in the war on terror, as the Bush administration has defined it to include the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, and operations elsewhere. According to Joshua Goldstein, an international relations professor at the American University, the global war on terror has seen fewer war deaths than any other decade in the past century, 272. A 2015 report by the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War and the Physicians for Social Responsibility and Physicians for Global Survival estimated between 1.3 million to 2 million casualties from the war on terror, 273. A report from September 2021 by Brown University's Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs, Costs of War, project puts the total number of casualties of the war on terror in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan at between 518,000 and 549,000. This number increases to between 897,000 and 929,000 when the wars in Syria, Yemen, and other countries are included. The report estimated that many more may have died from indirect effects of war such as water loss and disease, 274,29. They also estimated that over 38 million people have been displaced by the post-9/11 wars participated in by the United States in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and the Philippines. 26.7 million people have returned home following displacement. 2830. The conflict has caused the largest number of forced displacements by any single war since 1900, with the exception of World War II. 28. In a 2023 report, the Costs of War project estimated that, as the result of the destruction of infrastructure, economies, public services, and the environment, there have been between 3.6 and 3.7 million indirect deaths in the post-9/11 war zones, with the total death toll being 4.5 to 4.6 million and rising. 275. The report defined post-9/11 war zones as conflicts that included significant United States counterterrorism operations since 9/11, which in addition to the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, also includes the civil wars in Syria, Yemen, Libya, and Somalia. The report derived its estimate of indirect deaths using a calculation from the Geneva Declaration of Secretariat, which estimates that for every person directly killed by war, 4 more die from the indirect consequences of war. The report's author Stephanie Saville stated that in an ideal scenario, the preferable way of quantifying the total death toll would have been by studying excess mortality, or by using on-the-ground researchers in the affected countries. 4. An estimated 7,052 U.S. military combatants, Over 8,100 U.S. military contractors and more than 14,800 U.S. Allied coalition troops are estimated to have been killed in the wars as of 2023-29. The total number of insurgent deaths since the commencement of the War on Terror in 2001 is generally estimated as being well into the hundreds of thousands, with hundreds of thousands of others captured or arrested. Some estimates for regional conflicts include the following. Iraq. Main article, Casualties of the Iraq War. Duration, 13 minutes and 30 seconds, 13:30 subtitles available cc. Footage of leaked Apache gunship strike in Baghdad, July 2007. In Iraq, some 26,544 insurgents were killed by the American-led coalition and the Iraqi security forces from 2003 to 2011. 276. 119,752 suspected insurgents were arrested in Iraq from 2003 to 2007 alone, at which point 18,832 suspected insurgents had been reported killed, 277. Applying this same arrested to captured ratio to the total number of insurgents killed would equate to approximately 26,500 insurgents killed and 168,000 arrested from 2003 to 2011. At least 4,000 foreign fighters, generally estimated at 10–20% of the insurgency at that point, had been killed by September 2006, according to an official statement from al-Qaeda in Iraq. 278 insurgent casualties in the 2011–2013 phase of the Iraqi conflict numbered 916 killed, with 3,504 more arrested. From 2014 to the end of 2017, the United States government stated that over 80,000 Islamic State insurgents had been killed by American and Allied airstrikes from 2014 to the end of 2017 in both Iraq and Syria. The majority of these strikes occurred within Iraq. 279 ISIL deaths caused by the Iraqi security forces in this time are uncertain, but were probably significant. Over 26,000 ISF members were killed fighting ISIL from 2013 to the end of 2017, 280, with ISIL losses likely being of a similar scale. Total casualties in Iraq range from 62,570 to 1,124,000. Iraq Body Count Project documented 187,499 to 211,046 civilian dead from 2003 to 2020. The status of 24,000 people as civilians or combatants was not clear, with over 300,000 violent deaths, including combatants in total. 110,600 deaths in total, according to the Associated Press, from March 2003 to April 2009, 281. 151,000 deaths in total, according to the Iraq Family Health Survey, 282. Opinion Research Business Orb poll conducted 12–19 August 2007 estimated 1,033,000 violent deaths due to the Iraq War. The range given was 946,000 to 1,120,000 deaths. A nationally representative sample of approximately 2,000 Iraqi adults answered whether any members of their household living under their roof were killed due to the Iraq War. 22% of the respondents had lost one or more household members. Orb reported that 48% died from a gunshot wound, 20% from the impact of a car bomb, 9% from aerial bombardment, 6% as a result of an accident, and 6% from another blast ordnance. 283, 284, 285. Between 392,979 and 942,636 estimated Iraqi, 655,000 with a confidence interval of 95%, civilian and combatant, according to the second Lancet Survey of Mortality. A minimum of 62,570 civilian deaths reported in the mass media up to 28 April 2007, according to Iraq Body Count Project. 286. 4,431 U.S. Department of Defense dead, 941 non-hostile deaths, and 31,994 wounded in action during Operation Iraqi Freedom. 74 U.S. military dead, 36 non-hostile deaths, and 298 wounded in action during Operation New Dawn as of 4 May 2020. 287. Afghanistan. Main articles: Coalition casualties in Afghanistan and civilian casualties in the war in Afghanistan, 2001-2021. Insurgent and terrorist deaths in Afghanistan are hard to estimate. Afghan Taliban losses are most likely of a similar scale to Afghan National Army and police losses, that is around 62,000 from 2001 to the end of 2018, 288. In addition, Al-Qaeda's main branch and ISIL's Afghanistan branch are each thought to have lost several thousand killed there since 2001, 289-290. Total casualties in Afghanistan range from 10,960 and 249,000, 291. 725-19, 13 civilians killed, according to Cost of War Project from 2001 to 2013. 292. According to Mark W. Herold's extensive database, 293, between 3,100 and 3,600 civilians were directly killed by U.S. Operation Enduring Freedom bombing and Special Forces attacks between 7 October 2001 and 3 June 2003. This estimate counts only impact deaths, deaths that occurred in the immediate aftermath of an explosion or shooting, and does not count deaths that occurred later as a result of injuries sustained, or deaths that occurred as an indirect consequence of the U.S. airstrikes and invasion. In an opinion article published in August 2002 in the magazine The Weekly Standard, Joshua Muravchik of the American Enterprise Institute, 294, questioned Professor Herold's study entirely by one single incident that involved 2,593 deaths. He did not provide any estimate his own, 295. In a pair of January 2002 studies, Carl Canetta of the Project on Defense Alternatives estimates that at least 500 civilians were killed by mid-January 2002 as a result of the war and coalition airstrikes, both directly as casualties of the aerial bombing campaign and indirectly in the resulting humanitarian crisis. His first study, Operation Enduring Freedom, Why a Higher Rate of Civilian Bombing Casualties, 296, released 18 January 2002, estimates that at the low end, at least 300 civilians were directly killed in the aerial bombing campaign in just the 3 months between 7 October 2001 to 1 January 2002. The author found it impossible to provide an upper-end estimate to direct civilian casualties from the Operation Enduring Freedom bombing campaign that he noted as having an increased use of cluster bombs. 297. In this lower-end estimate, only Western press sources were used for hard numbers, while heavy reduction factors were applied to Afghan government reports so that their estimates were reduced by as much as 75%. 298. In his companion study, Strange Victory, a critical appraisal of Operation Enduring Freedom and the Afghanistan War, 299, released 30 January 2002, Canetta estimates that at least 3,200 more Afghans died by mid-January 2002 of starvation, exposure, associated illnesses, or injuries sustained while in flight from war zones, as a result of the war and coalition airstrikes. In similar numbers, A Los Angeles Times review of U.S., British, and Pakistani newspapers and international wire services found that between 1,067 and 1,201 direct civilian deaths were reported by those news organizations during the 5 months from 7 October 2001 to 28 February 2002. This review excluded all civilian deaths in Afghanistan that did not get reported by U.S., British, or Pakistani news, excluded 497 deaths that did get reported in U.S., British, and Pakistani news, but that were not specifically identified as civilian or military, and excluded 754 civilian deaths that were reported by the Taliban but not independently confirmed, 300. According to Jonathan Steele of The Guardian, between 20,000 and 49,600 people may have died of the consequences of the invasion by the spring of 2002, 301. 2,046 U.S. military dead, 339 non-hostile deaths, and 18,201 wounded in action, 302. A report titled Body Count put together by Physicians for Social Responsibility, Physicians for Global Survival, and International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, IPPNW, concluded that between 185,000 and 249,000 people had been killed as a result of the fighting in Afghanistan, 291. Deaths in Iraq and Afghanistan-Pakistan. Main articles: Drone strikes in Pakistan and terrorism in Pakistan. 1,467 and 2,334 people were killed in U.S. drone attacks as of 6 May 2011. Tens of thousands have been killed by terrorist attacks and millions have been displaced. The war in northwest Pakistan resulted in the deaths of 28,900 plus militants from 2004 to 2018, with an unknown number captured, per the Pakistani government, 304. The majority of these were killed in engagements with the Pakistan Armed Forces. However, thousands were also killed in American drone strikes. Somalia. There have been 7,000 plus casualties in Somalia. The December 2006 to January 2009 Ethiopian-led intervention in Somalia resulted in the deaths of 6,000 to 8,000 Islamist insurgents, according to the Ethiopian government. 306. The Kenyan Defense Forces claimed another 700 plus insurgents killed in their own intervention of October 2011 to May 2012. 307. American drone strikes, air strikes, and special forces ground raids in Somalia killed between 1,220 and 1,366 militants up to July 2019, according to the New American Foundation. 308. In December 2007, the Elman Peace and Human Rights Organization said it had verified 6,500 civilian deaths, 8,516 people wounded, and 1.5 million displaced from homes in Mogadishu alone during the year 2007. 309. Yemen. American forces, mostly via drone strikes, killed between 846 and 1,609 terrorists in Yemen, mostly AQAP members, up to June 2019. According to a variety of media organizations, including the Bureau of Investigative Journalism and the New America Foundation. 310. An Emirati spokesman for the Saudi-led coalition intervening in Yemen claimed that they had killed 1,000 al-Qaeda-linked militants and captured 1,500 up to August 2018. 311. Philippines and North Caucasus. Over 1,600 Islamic State fighters, Abu Sayyaf having sworn allegiance to ISIL in 2014, were killed by government forces in the Philippines from 2014 to 2017 alone. 312. From April 2009 to March 2019, Russian military and police, primarily in the North Caucasus, killed 2,329, and captured 2,744 insurgents of the Caucasus Emirate and related groups, 313. United States. 1 June 2009, PVT. William Andrew Long was shot and killed by Abdul Hakim Mohammed while outside a recruiting facility in Little Rock, Arkansas, 314-315. On 5 November 2009, Nidal Hassan shot and killed 13 people and wounded more than 30 others at Fort Hood, Texas during Operation Inherent Resolve. 95 troops were killed and 227 wounded in action as of 6 May 2022. The United States Department of Veterans Affairs has diagnosed more than 200,000 American veterans with PTSD since 2001, 323. Total civilian estimates. Children wounded by American airstrikes in Afghanistan's Sirkrad district in 2001. Between 363,939 and 387,072, civilians were killed in post-9/11 wars in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and other war zones, according to a 2021 report by the Costs of War Project at Brown University's Watson Institute. Many more may have died due to related effects, including water loss and disease. 29. Costs. The War on Terror, spanning decades, is a multi-trillion-dollar war that cost much more than originally estimated. According to the Costs of War Project at Brown University's Watson Institute, the War on Terror will have cost $8 trillion for operations between 2001 and 2022, plus $2.2 trillion in future costs of veterans care over the next 30 years, 324. Out of this number, $2.313 trillion is for Afghanistan, $2.058 trillion for Iraq and Syria, and $355 billion was spent on other war zones. The remainder was for DHS, $1.1 trillion. According to the Sufin Group in July 2015, the U.S. government was spending $9.4 million per day in operations against ISIL in Syria and Iraq, 325. A March 2011 Congressional Report 326 estimated war spending through the fiscal year 2011 at $1.2 trillion, and future spending through 2021, assuming a reduction to 45,000 troops, at $1.8 trillion. A June 2011 Academic Report 326, covering additional areas of war spending, estimated it through 2011 at $2.7 trillion, and long-term spending at $5.4 trillion including interest. Note 9. Indirect spending. The United States Department of Defense reports spending $1.547 trillion from 2001 to February 2020 in war costs in Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, 327. Adversary groups have taken an interest in agricultural bioterrorism, and this is a continuing concern. As of 2022, 328. The U.S. government takes steps to prepare for threats from agricultural pathogens, 328. The National Plant Disease Diagnostic Network, NPDN, coordinates efforts to combat agrowarfare against the U.S. criticism. Main article, Criticism of the War on Terror. See also, United States War Crimes section War on Terror. Participants in a rally, dressed as hooded detainees. Criticism of the War on Terror addresses the issues, morality, efficiency, economics, and other questions surrounding the War on Terror, and made against the phrase itself, calling it a misnomer. The notion of a war against terrorism has proven highly contentious, with critics charging that it has been exploited by participating governments to pursue long-standing policy military objectives, including structural Islamophobia, 333-334, reduce civil liberties, 335, and infringe upon human rights. It is argued that the term war is not appropriate in this context, as in the war on drugs, since there is no identifiable enemy, and that it is unlikely international terrorism can be brought to an end by military means. 46. Other critics, such as Francis Fukuyama, state that terrorism is not an enemy but a tactic, and calling it a war on terror obscures differences between conflicts such as anti-occupation insurgents and international mujahideen. With a military presence in Iraq and Afghanistan, and its associated collateral damage, Shirley Williams posits that this increases resentment and terrorist threats against the West. 336. There is also perceived U.S. hypocrisy. 337-338 media-induced hysteria. 339-340. And that differences in foreign and security policy have damaged America's reputation internationally. 341. The campaign has also been rebuked for being a perpetual war with no end goal and for normalizing permanent violence as the status quo. 342. In addition, Professor Richard Jackson notes how countries like Russia, India, Israel, and China adopted the language of the war on terror to describe their own fight against domestic insurgents and dissidents. He argues that linking rebels and dissidents at home to the global war on terrorism gives these governments both the freedom to crack down on them without fear of international condemnation, and in some cases, direct military assistance from America. 343. Professor of Law Anthony Anghie has asserted that war on terror is essentially an imperialist project that constitutes a breach of international law and the United Nations Charter. 159. There has also been systematic cover-ups of war crimes by military officers participating in campaign operations across the world. A public inquiry in the UK published in July 2023 reported that 3 British SAS units were involved in the summary executions of at least 80 civilians during 2010-2013, accompanied by a decades-long cover-up at the highest echelons of British Special Forces. 340, 340, 346. U.S. occupations in Afghanistan and Iraq became heavily unpopular among the American public by the late 2000s. 3233. Numerous U.S. military veterans have handed back their service medals, including the Global War on Terrorism Service Medal, in fierce protest rallies denouncing the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, with many condemning the military campaigns as illegal occupation of other countries. 347-348. Criticism of the war on terror has focused on its morality, efficiency, and cost. The notion of a war on terror remained contentious, with critics charging that it has been used to reduce civil liberties and infringe upon human rights. 34. Such as controversial actions by the U.S. including surveillance, torture, and extraordinary rendition, and drone strikes that resulted in the deaths of alleged terrorists, but also civilians. 37-38-39. Many of the U.S. actions were supported by other countries, including the 54 countries that were involved with CIA black sites, 349, or those that assisted with drone strikes, 350. Forced displacement. According to a 2021 study by the Costs of War Project, the several post-9/11 wars participated in by the United States in its war against terror have caused the displacement, conservatively calculated, of 38 million people in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Philippines, and Pakistan. 11.3 million remain displaced. This makes it the war that has caused the largest number of forced displacements since 1900, with the exception of World War II, 28. Another report by the Costs of War Project in 2023 estimates that the wars in these countries have caused a total number of 6 million deaths, including 3.6 million indirect deaths and 906,000 0000937 000 direct killings. Rather than basing this estimate on detailed data of the concerned countries, the cost of war report simply multiplied the tallied violent death toll of 906, 937, 000 by 4. By applying the Geneva Declaration, Secretariat's average ratio of 4 indirect for every 1 direct death. 352. Of the approximately 925,000 violent deaths estimated by the Cost of War Project, 542,000 were combatants and 387,000 were civilians. 353. The war costs have risen over $8 trillion for the U.S. Treasury. D. Critics accuse participating governments of using the war on terror to repress minorities or sideline domestic opponents. 41. Of fomenting Islamophobia globally. 42. And have criticized negative impacts to health and the environment resulting from it. 43, 44, 45. Critics assert that the term war is not appropriate in this context, much like the term war on drugs, since terror is not an identifiable enemy, and it is unlikely that international terrorism can be brought to an end by military means.